Morning. Oh, that was lackluster. We're small, we're few, but I think we're strong, right? Let's do that again. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a little better. I like that. I don't feel quite so alone. Thank you guys for being here instead of at the something clinic, art or music clinic. I know it's one of the two, right? I think we're going to have fun today, right? And have a good time. Michael asked me to relay an announcement to like the three people that were here today. There's more of us, so I'm grateful for that. He said that there is a Dave Ramsey Financial Peace program. It's happening on Wednesday night, 7 p.m. I'm guessing maybe... Okay, well, I was trying to follow orders. It would be downstairs, apparently. I saw something. Okay, but I fulfilled my obligation to Michael, so we're going to dive in. And this morning we're going to look at this passage. I didn't do a big slide presentation. I didn't do handouts because I thought this would just be kind of a small group of us so we can hang out a little bit as Bethany. We're going to actually look at a passage from the Gospel of John. For me, the Gospel of John is a little bit of like catnip for a cat. I really enjoy the Gospel of John. It's not just because of the namesake, right? I actually think the writing, he has a lot of irony. He's got some funny elements in there. He's very self-aware and reflective, and it's a very interesting story. So today we're going to look at John chapter 12. You have that on your phone. Great. If you want to grab a Bible from the pew in front of you, great. That's fine. I'm going to be reading from the newfangled version. Of course, I kid. I'm going to still be reading from my favorite version, which is called The Voice. And this is a modern version where they took biblical scholars and they put them in a room with a lot of poets and musicians and artists to basically not only get the correct interpretation or meaning behind those words, but also to create language that sounded nice, that flowed. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically read through these 11 verses and we're going to unpack them. I'm going to look at some of the historical context and reality, and then I want us to unpack. And I think almost every sermon has to have 3 points, and so I've created 3 points, which I hope are pretty solid, right? And a big takeaway at the end, a big surprise finish, so we're going to do that. But if you want, you just close your eyes and listen as I read through these 11 verses, or if you want to read along, that's fine as well. So this is, again, the Gospel of John, chapter 12, verses 1 through 11. 6 days before the Passover feast, so this is Christ's final week, right? And we're getting close to Easter, right? Death and resurrection. We're getting Palm Sunday, this next Sunday. So Jesus journeyed to the village of Bethany. Now this, if you don't remember, Jerusalem is on one side of the Kidron Valley, and then on the other side is Bethany. It's the Mount of Olives. It's Bethany up at the other side of that hill, and so this is very close. It's Passover's close. People are starting to make their way to Jerusalem itself. Christ is making his way there. He ends up in Bethany, which is just across the valley, as I mentioned, to the home of Lazarus, who had recently been raised from the dead. Now this is actually, it's interesting, this is mentioned again because John chapter 11, is the story of the raising of Lazarus. John is really around 7 different signs or miracles, and that 7th sign, that last miracle was the resurrection of Lazarus. And so here he was resurrected, and again, even after the fact, we're in chapter 12 now, they again reference that Jesus had just raised Lazarus from the dead. And this is important. We'll find out more about that as we go. So now verse 2, where they hosted him, for dinner. Martha was busy serving as the hostess, and Lazarus reclined at the table with him. And then Mary took out a pound of fine ointment and pure nard, which is both rare and expensive, and anointed Jesus' feet with it. And then she wiped them with her hair, as the pleasant fragrance of this extravagant ointment filled the entire house. Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, who was plotting to betray Jesus, began to speak. Verse 5. How could she pour out this vast amount of fine oil? Why didn't she sell it It is worth nearly a year's wage, and the money could have been given to the poor. Verse 6, this had nothing to do with Judas's desire to help the poor. The truth is, he served as a treasurer, and he helped himself to the money from the common pot at every opportunity. Jesus said in verse 7, leave her alone. She has observed this custom in anticipation of the day of my burial. The poor are ever present, but I will be leaving. Verse 9, word spread of Jesus' presence, and a large crowd was gathered to see Jesus and the formerly deceased Lazarus, again Lazarus is mentioned, whom he had brought back from the dead. Verse 10, the chief priests were secretly plotting Lazarus' murder. Because of him, many Jews were leaving their teachings and believing in Jesus. And then they go on, and you start to find this whole throng the next day. Jesus comes into Jerusalem, and he's riding that colt, and everyone, this is the Palm Sunday, they're waving the palm branches and laying out their robes in front of Christ, and they're saying, Hosanna, he who comes is in the name of the Lord, right? And it's like his inaugural approach into the city, right? We kind of understand how that ends. But I think it's interesting. So there's a few things that we need to unpack. First of all, let's talk about just the context of the environment. What's going on with this nard, this oil, this fragrance that Mary brought? Well, a couple things. First of all, they were living in a time, and I know this is going to be hard for us, they were living to visualize in a time before deodorants, right? They didn't have that Axial body spray from men, right? So there was none of that. There was no stick deodorant. There was no antiperspirants. And so you think, well, back then they can kind of handle the odors better than we can today. You know, they were desensitized. Well, no, that's not really true. And so when they would get together in a group, and it's not like a cool climate, you know, they would get into some small cramped house or some small space, and a lot of these workers and fishermen and everybody else under the sun, and it became a very fragrant environment. Okay? Does this make sense? And so what would happen is as people would come into your home, one of the niceties, one of the things that the host might do is they would anoint each guest with a little bit of fragrance, with a little oil on their head, and that would just start to permeate and act as almost a large deodorant. Okay, so it made the party much more enjoyable. Does it make sense? Well, secondly, there's another dynamic that you need to be aware of. They didn't have, and I know this could be a shock, they didn't have modern transportation. They didn't have cars, you know, with like 200 horsepower, right? What they had, instead of the 200 horsepower cars, they had horses with 1 horsepower. But they didn't emit the same kind of exhaust that is today, right? And so everybody's coming in their camels, and they have sheep to sacrifice, and they've got donkeys, and they've got all kinds of livestock. And all these livestock is tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of people are making their way to Jerusalem. There would be a lot of stuff left on the roads. Not paved roads, but dirt roads. Do you start to understand? And there wasn't like a way around. This is just part of life. And so you're wearing sandals, and your feet would get fairly dirty. Does this make sense? Are you kind of getting a picture in your mind of what's going on here? So there's a couple dynamics that are going on. Well, when they would come into people's homes, it was kind of etiquette, I think, for a number of reasons that you would not wear your sandals in the house. In fact, this is why often they would wash feet. So the feet would be clean, except for the feet and shoes were considered to be so dirty, so detestable, so vile, that actually in Levitical law it was not, you could not, as a master, let's say that you had servants, you could not require them to touch your sandals, to unlatch your sandals. Does that make sense? Because that was like too degrading. Are you guys getting the picture here? That was too degrading, too low. And so when Christ, he offered to wash the disciples' feet, they were shocked. They were shocked. This was wow, way out of scope. So they have these couple things going on. His feet were walking through the mire that everyone else's feet were walking through. I'm sure he probably washed them and whatever. He was anointed maybe coming in. This story is repeated in a number of different passages. I'm just going to stick with John. I may allude to a couple of the others, but you can look them up in your own free time. But so there's these two dynamics that are going on. Sorry, I should have chewed right there. Into the mic. So what happens is Jesus comes into the home of Lazarus, Martha, and Mary, just after Lazarus has been resurrected. And it's weird because during that whole story of Lazarus being resurrected, he had been in the tomb so many days, right? Like the type of price had been there 3 days. And he ends up, they said, remember this? Jesus says, roll away the stone. And he says, Lord, he is going to stink. He stinketh, right? That's the King James word. He stinketh. It's the only time we get to use that word this one. And so here's like this fragrance again, which is kind of interesting. Death and this fragrance. And now, Jesus is in their house eating this meal. And Mary comes into the room. And Mary does something, three things really, that are absolutely incredible. So the first thing is she takes this ointment, this incredibly valuable heirloom. I say heirloom because it was probably the most precious, most valuable thing that they owned. Okay, and this was so precious and so valuable, it was like, even if the economy blew up, even if you completely were dead, you would always have something to fall back on. You would always have something to fall back on. This was like their savings. This was, if anything bad happened, we're going to be okay. And often parents might give this to their kids, and their kids give it to their kids, right? And yet Mary comes in with this perfume, this ointment, this oil, and she breaks it open. Now, some would say it was in an alabaster box, right? Which means it couldn't be put back together. It was like a single-use kind of item. That once it was broken open, she was going to dump it. But so there's a certain level of extravagance there, which is fairly shocking. But then the second thing, she puts this on Christ's feet, right? Not his head, not his shoulder. She puts this ointment on his feet. Now this is a very humbling place for her to put this ointment because of the filth, because of the dirt, because of the grime. I mean, this is a place of humility, of unworth, where it's that same message that John the Baptist said, that I am not the Christ, I'm not the Messiah, but I am preceding the one who is yet to come, whose shoes, whose sandals I'm not worthy to even untie, which was saying a lot because even slaves would not be commanded to touch someone's sandals because it was too degrading. Does it make sense? And yet John says, I'm not even worthy of untying this figure's sandals. And here Mary is, who gives this extravagant gift. She not only gives this gift, she actually places it on his feet. And then she goes one step further, and as we read in the text, and she actually lets down her hair. Now, women, this was not a custom. Normally, women kept their hair up, and they would only let their hair down on their wedding, like their wedding day, their wedding night. This was a time where they would be. It was very intimate. It was very intimate. Like, you just don't let your hair down for anyone. There's a certain connotation, right? It's vulnerability, and it was so intimate. It probably made everyone in that house feel immediately uncomfortable. And here she is. She's just anointing Christ's feet, and now she's crying, and she's literally drying off Christ's feet with her own hair, right? You think, what is going on here? We're gonna unpack that a little more in a minute. I just want you to understand the dynamics, historical dynamics. And of course, the passage goes on to say that Judas is there and he's watching, and he starts to say, why was this done? All this money could have been given to the poor, right? And of course, John says he didn't say that because he truly cared about the poor. It's because he had his hand in the pot, right? And he would constantly take out for his own himself. And so there's a couple things. There's a couple things I want to pull out of this. So the first thing is it talks about Lazarus a lot, and Lazarus had just died. Guys, I was at a death, so I'm a chaplain at the hospital, for those of you who don't know. And as a chaplain, I sit with people who die, who are in the process of dying. I sit with their families, and so I see a lot of death. The first thing that one of the things I've come to understand, and I sat with a woman one time, her husband died, he died young of cancer like many have, and immediately after he had passed, tears still streaming down her face, she looks up and she says to me, she says, I realize now what a waste it was. We would fight, and how wasteful we wasted that time. We never argued about anything important. It wasn't that important. The things we argued about were with small stuff. It's like laundry or dishes or, whatever it wasn't that important when you look at how short life is. And she was crying, saying, I wish I hadn't given my time to these arguments, and instead I give my time to something else. Right? And what she's saying is, I think something that's very powerful, and this is kind of my first takeaway, is that death has a way of revealing what's important, what your values and your priorities are. Okay? And so when you see something that's about to die, or there's in this concept of death, it really uncovers and unmasks your priorities. And so in some ways, death is a very positive thing. They actually did some research, and what they said is people who think about their own death, or they think about death several times a day, are actually happier. And the reason for it may be paradoxical, but it's because when they realize life is short, they are more intentional in the way that they live, the choices that they make, the attitude. And so I do this all the time because I see death so often. I am constantly thinking about what happens if I were going to die today. How am I going to live today? So if someone is mean and unkind to me at work, that can be very upsetting, right? Maybe you've experienced some unkindness, some slight in your job, and there's a part of you that wants to hold on to that, right? You want to get angry, you want to get upset, you want to be hurt by that, you want to take it personally. But at the same time, I realize, and I have this in my head, I say, I'm going to be hit by that proverbial boss at 4 p.m. That's what I kind of think. So if I'm going to be hit by that boss by 4 p.m., if I only have a few hours left, am I going to spend the last 4 hours on this earth worrying about what someone else said about me? Am I going to spend those last 4 hours that I'm alive, complaining and moaning and talking about how bad life is? Or am I going to live those 4 hours that I have left with meaning and purpose and value and be happy and make an impact and have fun and do good? Do you know what I mean? And so death helps to uncover the values that we already have. And it doesn't have to be a physical death. It can be the death of a dream. It can be death of a relationship. It can be death. There's a lot of little deaths that we face in life, right? But death has a way of uncovering and unmasking the true priorities. And so when we look at this, here Mary is. She had just experienced death. She experienced the death of her brother, right? And she had grieved for days. They had laid him in the tomb. They had rolled that stone in place. And they had grieved, weeping and crying day and night because Lazarus, whom she loved, had died. And then Jesus comes and he brings her brother, her only brother, back to life. And in that moment, that uncovered, that unmasked her values and priorities. And when, in light of all that Christ was and what he was able to do, all the wealth that she had would seem like nothing at all. She saw him as so great and so precious that she had in mind humbling herself even to the level of his feet. Right? And that love was so deep and so profound and so intimate that she didn't even think twice about letting down her hair in his presence, right? And all of these symbols are a way of showing, revealing her heart and her values and her priorities. in the face of that death that had just taken place. But this is not the only heart that was revealed that day. And it's not the only hearts that were revealed in this chapter. You see, Judas is standing there. And he's watching this woman who's finally revealing all of her priorities and what she truly values in life. And this isn't to say that the poor are unimportant. We'll talk about that. Because Jesus' response is, you will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me. And we have to understand that. Because some people can say, oh, see, the poor aren't that big a deal, no big deal. I don't think that's true. Scripture everywhere, very focused on the poor. But Judas, when he saw this ointment being poured out, what did he say? All this money could have been given to the poor, but he had a different motive. He had a different desire, didn't he? It was for wealth and for gain. Those were his true priorities. His priorities were not discipleship. It wasn't following Christ. It wasn't Christ at all. It was about wealth and gain. In fact, you find later, very short time later, Judas was willing to sell Christ for 30 pieces of silver. He was willing to sell Christ for 30 pieces of silver because he wanted money more than he wanted anything else. His values and priorities were money. Well, then you find the religious leaders, and we talked about them at the end of this passage. The religious leaders, they had values, they had priorities as well in the face of Jesus' imminent death. They had a death that they were experiencing. So Judas is seeing a death of wealth taking place, and he's on his heart and his mouth is revealing his heart. But then you see these religious leaders. Lazarus has been raised. And everyone is flocking to Lazarus and to Jesus because of that resurrection. There's a death and this resurrection. And the religious leaders, they didn't care about wealth. What they cared about, they cared about the respect and the opinion of men. They liked Jesus in some of the Gospels, like Matthew, would say, you only care about these flowery prayers you get to say in public. You only care that people call you rabbi and master. Right? This is why you do what you do. And they saw all these accolades going to Lazarus and to Jesus, and they said, it looks as if the entire world is following after him. And they decided, they planted in their heart, we should kill Lazarus again. It's the only way. And then they eventually decided to plot Christ's death as well. And that's not the Jews, that's not the group, those are these individuals, because that was their priorities. Does that make sense? And we're going to talk about, there's more to that, but I just want to throw that out there. So there's one, death reveals our priorities and what those are. We could ask ourselves, what are your priorities today? What are the things that you value? And how can you determine those? Now, the second thing that is very clear in this passage, that when those values are uncovered, whatever values those are, you're going to do one of two things for those values. And they're very, very clearly shared in this passage. You're either willing to die for what you believe, or you're willing to kill for what you believe. Does that make sense? You're either willing to die, to sacrifice, to give up for what you believe, or you're willing to take, by force if necessary, everything including human life for your values and priorities. And these are two different, very different values and priorities. I would say one is aligned with kingdom values and another is aligned with human values. Does that make sense? And far too often, we are willing to kill, we're willing to gossip, kill people with our tongue, we're willing to hurt others, minimize others, we're willing to legislate against others that are marginalized, we're willing to do all of these things to hurt others so that we can have our values. We kill in the name of what we believe to be good. And whenever we will kill or we will take to somehow justify our good, I think we have a problem, right? I want to just say one more thing that kind of couples between that first point, that death reveals our priorities, and what I'm talking about now, that we are either willing to die or to kill for the values that we hold. What I found, and this is very helpful, is that our values are either in one of two camps. We either value people or we value objects or things, status, something, we either value people or we value things. And so here Judas valued wealth. Those religious leaders, they value the pride and their position, their authority, their positional power, right? And they were willing to sacrifice people to achieve their values. And so I think true values are the values of the kingdom of God are values that embrace people. They're willing to sacrifice for the sake of others rather than for the sake of self. Does that make sense? Kind of quiet. Don't be too much longer. All right? Got one more. Last thing. There is a teaching in the Talmud. And it's something that I think you've heard. I think they had it. They referenced it in Schindler's List. And it's a statement that says, "He who saves a single life saves the entire world." All right? He who saves a single life saves the entire world. But let me back up. There's one last thing I forgot to mention. When you're willing to either die or to kill for your values, this either puts yourself or something else or someone else in the center of your values and beliefs. And when you put yourself in the center, that's when you're always willing to kill. When you will put other people ahead of your own needs and wants and desire, that's when you are freed from that bondage of I am so important, right? I think I listened to a sermon on this passage recently, and they were talking about, I believe, Audrey Hepburn. And she, apparently she was married, she moved to New York City, and she became famous. She started getting all this wealth and all these people were looking to her, and you're so amazing, you're so beautiful, and what she did is she drank the Kool-Aid. And it was a temptation that you're better than, right? You're better than it can be for any reason. And so she started to believe what people were saying about her. And so what she did is she got rid of her husband because she was too good for him, right? She was going to trade up. And she said, this is a trap. She did an interview. And I don't remember Forbes magazine, but it was kind of a reflective piece looking back over her life. And she said, essentially, that this is a problem that happens to many celebrities. If they'll get to this place of success, they'll think and start to believe themselves as better than, and they start to make decisions based on that. And then when they finally wake up to the reality that they are no better or worse than anybody else, they feel so guilty and carry that burden so heavily that they end up doing all this philanthropic work near the end of their life. They start giving and doing, and it's trying to offset because they started to feel that they were that too important. They believed it. And I think we all have that temptation, right? And so the last one that I said, he who saves a single life saves the entire world. And this can be used in a number of different senses and a number of different contexts, but it's being able to value the single individual. Too often what we do is we group people, we dehumanize people as a result, and we don't really see people. And so we can talk about refugees as this block or as this group, or we can talk about people with different sexual orientation. They're like a number, they're a group. There's not a human element there. And this is a problem because it allows us potentially to lose our heart, to no longer see the people or the individuals that make up this group. We just see these groups and we dehumanize them. Therefore, it's easy to push them down and to elevate ourselves. Does that make sense? And so this is such a weird concept because this very statement, he who saves a single life saves the entire world, is from the Talmud. Caiaphas, the high priest, in this time, which we'll hear from in a few chapters, he had used a similar sort of version of this at Christ's trial, didn't he? He used this statement, a little bit of this statement at Christ's trial. He said, isn't it better that Christ died, Jesus died, and we save our entire country? Isn't it better that he died, that we killed Christ, and then we are saved? But that's not what the passage really says in the Talmud. The Talmud says, he who not kills a single person. He says, he that saves a single life saves the entire world. Think about that. And by killing that one person, they damn themselves. You know, it's that curse that they said, let this curse be upon us and our children and our children's children. Do you think we live in a day and an age, well, I'm here. We live in a day and an age where it's very tempting to think that we're better than. I'm better than because I'm white. I'm better than because I'm male. I'm better than because I'm heterosexual. I'm better than because I'm American. I'm better than because I'm a citizen instead of a refugee. I'm better than, right? And it's always our centers on ourselves. It's never the giving. And this is really where we start to know whether we're truly following Christ or not. Because Christ did not come with a mindset of better than. Christ came to humble himself and to give himself away. To give himself as a ransom for many, is what the Bible says. Right? And so when we think about this, think about the other, whoever the other is in our culture, in our day, in our society, and say, am I valuing the individual? Am I valuing others? Am I giving extravagantly for others? Because to the least of these you've done, or to the least of, whatever you've done to the least of these you've done to me. The way you treat orphans today, right now, is the way you treat Christ right now. The way you treat refugees today is the way you treat Christ today. The way you treat someone with a sexual orientation that's different than yours, that's a different ethnicity or skin color or whatever it is, the way you treat those other people really uncovers, unmasks your values and priorities. Right? And so we, I think, like that alabaster jar, we need to be broken. I need to be broken of my own values and priorities and be able to give everything, lay it at the feet of Jesus, so that he alone can have dominance, preeminence, all the glory, and all the honor that he is very much due. All right? Thank you so much for your time.